When I was young, around 6 or 7, my family and I went on vacation to Morocco. It was a very nice place. We visited a lot of different towns, and we even went to the beach where we swam and had fun. In total, we stayed about 3 weeks. One of the weeks we had a plan to rent a 4x4 and go into the desert to explore and go to different towns and resorts, etc. The first day of our desert expedition, we woke up early, got in the 4x4 and drove off into the desert. We would stop every 30 minutes or so to walk around a bit and to play in the sand and to take in the beautiful scenery. It was a really fun day. That night we stayed in a hotel to then leave early in the morning and do some more exploring. The next day, as we were driving along, my parents decided to stop and have lunch in the middle of the desert, as we got a lot of food in the car. My brothers and I were happy to have time to go out and play. We had lunch, packed up, and just when we were about to leave, we realized we were stuck. The 4x4 wouldn't move. It had sunk into the sand. We were stuck there for about 5 hours, and my family didn't seem to care much about it, but I was freaking out. I was crying and yelling for help. I thought we were going to die, even though we had enough food for days. Then, just when my parents were starting to get a bit stressed, we could see a car in the distance. It was coming towards us. We were saved. The car, with 2 men inside, stopped to help us get our car out of the sand, and then even offered to take us to an inn that belongs to their friend. We were so grateful for the offer, and my parents accepted. They drove us there in their truck whilst towing our car behind for a few hours, until we arrived to this inn in the desert. It was a very nice place, with traditional walls and nice scenery. My brothers and I went outside on a little sand dune to play, while my parents talked to the men. They helped us make sure our car was running normally, and they were very nice and hospitable. And that was it. We didn't think anything else of these men and the situation. It was around 7 p.m. when I was still playing outside, and I started to get a bit cold, so I went back inside to get a sweater. When I went inside, I saw my dad hiding around a corner, listening to the men talking to each other in Arabic. I didn't think anything was up, so I went to get my sweater and went back outside. Night came and we went to bed. I was in a room with my mum, and my brothers were in the next room with my dad. It was around 2 a.m. when my mum woke me up and told me to get dressed because she wanted to go on a little walk. My family left the room, got in the car, and we left. We never went back. I didn't understand why this was going on, and I assumed we were just driving around. We spent the rest of the vacation in towns and built-up areas, away from the desert. I didn't know this at the time, but my parents just told me the full story of that night. My dad had overheard the men talking about how someone would come pick us up in the morning, and when my mum was sleeping, she saw a man with a knife come into our room and hide in our closet. They were human traffickers who went around the desert rounding tourists up and selling them. So human traffickers of the Moroccan desert, let's not meet again. This is my first time posting to this subreddit. I've had a few encounters from several years ago, but this particular one I'm going to tell you now happened tonight, a couple of hours ago in fact. So I live in the Phoenix metro area. I had just gotten off from work at 9:30 p.m. I work at a marketing job that requires me to stay semi-late. However, they've been letting me out a little early so I could catch the bus home and save money from taking an Uber. Due to my financial situation, I'm unable to drive my car as it's broken down. I've been having to ride the bus this past month. Anyway, there's 2 buses I have to take to get home. One going down the road a few miles from where I work, and the second one that takes me a few miles, stopping a couple of blocks away from my apartment. I board the first bus around 10:10, and the journey happens with no incident. I exited the first bus and needed to cross a busy street to get to the next bus stop. I noticed my second bus was already at the stop, but I couldn't cross the street yet because the cars had a green light, and since there were so many cars, I couldn't just book it across the street. By the time the crosswalk signaled for me to go, the bus had already gone, and the next one wasn't coming for another half an hour. I was quite frustrated, so I just crossed the street, sat down on a bench at the stop, and watched videos with my earbuds in. It was now 10:20 at this point, and the next bus doesn't arrive until 10:50. It's important to note that I'm a 19-year-old girl, so I'm already anxious about being out so late at night in the cold. I looked up and noticed 4 men walking in my direction. I tried to look down at my phone and pay no mind to them. One of them sat on the bench across from me, another sat next to me, and the other 2 men were standing. The man across from me was wearing a blue jacket and hat. He tells me I'm beautiful and started asking me about myself. Just normal banter from guys. I politely smile and continue looking at my phone. This guy didn't seem to be happy about what I was doing, and so started calling me an ugly crack whore, etc. I couldn't help but laugh since this guy was getting so butthurt because I had rejected his advances. At this point his friends were standing up in my defense, telling him he shouldn't be talking to a woman in that way. I did nothing to provoke him. Blue jacket guy starts getting even more hostile in his tone, and my instincts tell me to quietly pull out my pepper spray just in case things escalate. It's a good thing I did this, because now blue jacket guy gets up and starts pacing, and he's getting too close for comfort. His friends stand around me, forming a shield against him. It felt like an eternity before the bus finally showed up. I told the men to board as I needed to speak to the driver first. All of them boarded, and I told the driver not to let the blue jacket guy get on the bus. I explained the situation, and even his friends and the other passengers on the bus told the driver not to let him board. The driver then asked what street the blue jacket guy was getting off at. He said Sunset Drive. Then the driver asked me what street I was getting off at. Not wanting to alert the guy where I was getting off, I didn't name the street, but did say I was getting off way past Sunset Drive. The driver then went back to his seat and started driving. Blue jacket guy tried to sit next to me, but one of his friends sat down next to me beforehand while the other 2 sat across from me. Blue jacket guy sat as close to me as he could, which was about 5 seats down. His friends said that they would protect me and beat him up if necessary. There were some exchanges back and forth between them all, but I was too worried to listen. By the time we made it to Sunset Drive, his friends exited the bus, but blue jacket guy stayed on. I told the driver he was supposed to get off here, but was now refusing. His friends were begging him to get off the bus, but he kept refusing. He kept trying to convince the driver that he'd said the wrong street name, but the driver wasn't buying it. Blue jacket guy then started walking towards me. I had my pepper spray clutched in my hand and preparing for the worst. I am now on the phone with my boyfriend, crying and telling him to meet me at my stop. The driver gets up and tells blue jacket guy he needs to exit the bus or else the local police will be called. At this point, blue jacket guy finally gives up and exits the bus. As the bus was pulling away, blue jacket guy hits my window, yelling obscenities at me. I did eventually meet my boyfriend at the stop, and he safely walked me home. Now I'm sitting on the couch typing this out and self-medicating with my wax pen. Blue jacket guy from Phoenix, if you're reading this, let's not meet. This took place about 10 years ago when I was 14. It was my friend Violet's birthday party, and after the main thing had finished, she had a handful of girls stay for a sleepover. We had tried to sleep at some point, but quickly realised that there wasn't enough room for us all, so we'd collectively decided to just not sleep. It got to about 4 a.m. of us just hanging out, when we figured we wanted something to eat, but there wasn't anything in the house, so we decided to sneak out and get something. There were 4 of us, Kira, Haley, Violet and myself, so we figured, what's the worst that can happen with such a big group of us? Now the 7-Eleven wasn't very far from our house. It was maybe a 10-minute walk. It was straight up the dark residential road, but then you turn into the main street where it was bright and filled with shops. We made it there without incident, paid for our noodles and left. As we were walking back up the main street, the police pulled up beside us. Apparently there's a curfew law in our city for young people, but none of us knew about it. We managed to talk our way out of any trouble. We were only staying around the corner and we were just out getting food. And yes, of course my friend's mum knew we were out. They wished us all a good night and left. We got about halfway down my friend's street when we saw a white van indicating to turn left into the street from one of the side roads. I didn't think much of it, but apparently it creeped Kira out enough that she put her hand out to signal for us to stop. Hayley wasn't having it and automatically started talking shit and calling Kira paranoid. But then we see the van's indicator change from left to right, towards us. Kira yells at us to run. Hayley and I are the fastest, so we're ahead of the other girls, and we're both fully ready to just sprint the entire way back. But then we hear Violet yelling for us to come back and turn into one of the other side roads. So we run back to her and Kira. I'm not too sure what the actual plan was, but Kira turns into a dentist's surgery and hides behind some hedges, and we follow her. The massive issue with this dentist is that it only has one entry, and you couldn't just go across the flower bed to get out, because it was surrounded by huge, thick bushes. We can hear the van approaching us, and it's approaching us extremely slowly. Hayley is freaking out loudly, and Violet ends up holding her hand over her mouth to keep her quiet. We can see that the van is indicating again from the light's reflection on the road, and we think we're done for. I remember thinking that we'd just spoken to those police officers, and that they were just around the corner from us, but at the time we were far from any help. But then the van turns into the supermarket car park across the road, and not into the dentist's. Kira peeps above the bush and sees two men getting out of the car. She turns to us and says, "Run! Don't stop running until we get home, no matter what." So we do just that. The second we're out from behind the bush, we can hear one of the men yell something, and the other started running after us. The one that yelled got back in the van and started after us. We could hear him chasing us down the street, but we had had a head start and managed to make it back to the house. Violet had accidentally locked the door behind us when we left and didn't bring the key, and the few seconds it took her to get the spare that was hidden in one of her pot plants and fumble with the lock was truly terrifying. We spent the rest of the night looking out the window expecting to see that van. 2 weeks later, a 14-year-old girl fought off two men who grabbed her and tried to pull her into a white van in the same area. We were so sure it was the same people, but we never reported it because we were too scared we'd get in trouble for sneaking out. I don't know if they ever caught them or if they tried it again, but I truly pray that they were never successful in whatever it was they were trying to do. My wife and I travelled back to her hometown in Brisbane, Australia for the New Year holidays to spend time relaxing in the sun with the extended family and friends. Unfortunately, it was ruined by an encounter with a creep who insisted, with a very vicious persistence, that I wear the party hat that came out of one of the bonbons I shared with him. For those of you who don't know, a bonbon is like a party cracker that two people pull from each end and break open. They contain a small trinket like a whistle, balloon, party hat, etc. I hardly knew anyone at the party except for my wife's immediate family, which totalled to 4 people. About 20 people had gathered, and after dinner dessert was served, and along with it came some festively decorated bonbons. I was seated next to a man of about 30. He looked relatively normal, except he hadn't touched a drop of alcohol the whole night, and as far as I could tell, he was nursing the same ginger beer I saw him with when I first walked in. Apart from exchanging a friendly nod when I sat next to him, we hadn't said a word to each other. Then the bonbons came out, and I suddenly found myself being presented with one end of it by him. Other guests were already pulling theirs apart, so I obliged and pulled my end. A small folded square of paper flew out and into my lap. It was a party hat, purple, shaped like a crown and made from what looked like tissue paper. I laughed and offered it to him. He stared pointedly at me, really cold, hard eyes. "Put it on, mate," he said. Sounded more like an order. I insistently felt awkward and didn't know whether to laugh at his reaction or not. I excused myself and told him I'd give it to one of the kids as it was clearly far too small to fit on my head. He didn't like this answer. "Hey, come on, it's a party. Just have some fun and put the hat on." He was visibly pissed off when he said it. My awkwardness peaked to an intolerable level, and I told him I'd go find one of the kids to give it to. I found my wife and asked who the guy was. She said she didn't know him, but knew his name was Jono, and she took the hat from me. I saw he wasn't seated at the table anymore, but was mingling about the room talking to other guests. But as he was talking to them, he would look over at me and even point me out and say something to the person. They'd look confused and a little creeped out themselves. He was making a gesture like putting on a hat too. Then he would screw up his face when looking at me. A little later I was having a small talk with my wife's brother-in-law when Jono came out of nowhere and said to him, "You see this guy here?" He looked disgustedly at me. "He wouldn't even put his fucking hat on. It's New Year's Eve and he won't even have any fun." Her brother-in-law looked really confused and sort of just steered the conversation back to ourselves whilst trying to ignore him. As Jono left our chat, he said to me, coming in real close to my ear, "You'll wear that fucking hat, even if I have to put it on your fucking dead head myself." Well, when someone says something like that to you, what do? The whole rest of the evening was spent in nervous anticipation of another run-in with Jono. He was still there, of course, watching me from one side of the room or the other. Sometimes he'd grin and make a gun with his finger and go bang, 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 silently from across the room. I did, however, come face to face with him again that night as I went to the toilet. It was occupied and I stood waiting by the door. I heard the toilet flush, then the door opened. It was Jono. He looked me up and down, then put his arm across the door frame. "Sorry, only for people who wear party hats." He looked defiant, psychotic, and very dangerous. Then he laughed and removed his arm. A few moments after I had entered the toilet, there was a massive bashing sound on the door. The door shook on its hinges, once, twice, then one final time, which knocked the door handle off completely. Then Jono screaming at me from outside in the hall. "Wear the fucking hat, you fucking cunt! It's a fucking party, wear it!" Then there was a weird silence. The only sound was the muffled music coming from the living room. Everyone was silent. It stayed like that for a few minutes, maybe more. Then I exited. Everyone seemed to be acting normally, and what's more, there was no Jono to be found. One guest, I didn't know their name, asked me if I had heard the guy banging his head against the toilet door. I wasn't going to stick around to see if he was still there. I grabbed my wife and made an excuse to leave, and we got the hell out. But it didn't end there. The next day around 3 a.m, there were 3 or 4 sharp knocks on my front door. They definitely weren't from somebody's hand. Sounded more like a hammer or something heavy. I opened the door very slowly and found no one there. Then I noticed it. Nailed to my front door with a 10-penny nail was the purple party hat I had pulled from the bonbon. We cut our holiday short and flew home the next day. This happened to me my freshman year of college. Tinder was new, and everyone at my university was on the app. I joined to see what all the fuss was about. Looking through profiles, I found a few guys that were really interesting, and this one guy in particular caught my eye. We'll call him Walter. I swiped right on Walter and we matched. I was excited and kinda giddy because he was super attractive. He messaged me and I got butterflies in my stomach. We messaged back and forth on the app for maybe an hour. It was a typical conversation. I asked him what he did for a living, and he asked what my major was. Harmless conversation. After a while, he asked for my number so we could text instead of messaging on the app. I gave it to him and he seemed nice enough. We messaged back and forth again for a few days, making lots of flirty conversation, and plans to hang out finally occurred. By the 4th day of messaging, he started calling me babe, which gave me mixed feelings. It was cute, but also a little weird. We didn't really know each other and had never met. I ignored it though and continued on with the conversation. He started saying he wanted to be exclusive and he really wanted to see me in person. He was begging me at this point to come to his apartment to cuddle and watch movies with him and his dog. I told him that our first meet needed to be in public and I wouldn't be going to some stranger's apartment. He said I was overreacting and kept begging. I ignored him for the rest of the night. The next day he apologized and said he understood we needed to meet in public, so we made plans that weekend. The weekend came faster than I expected, and it was the day we were supposed to meet. Something just felt off, and I decided to back out. I texted him apologizing, saying my mum wasn't feeling well and needed me to come home to help her with some house chores. This made him annoyed, and he said, "Your mum is a big girl. If she needs you, she can call you. Just come over and you can leave whenever to go and help her. I really want to see you and kiss you." I told him no, and that I would be staying with my mum that weekend, and that was that. I only lived about 30 minutes from home, so I actually did go home to see my mum that day. After what he'd said about my mum, I started ignoring him. That's when the text started rolling in. Text after text. "Babe, I'm sorry, please come over. Babe, I miss you. Are you going to come over?" I planned on replying the next day that I was just busy with my mum. Then he started calling me. I had a total of 45 missed phone calls within a 2-hour period. He left voicemails saying he was sorry and he just missed me and wanted me to call him back. Similar voicemails continued almost the entire time I was home. My roommate texted me shortly after I'd finished dinner with my mum and asked if we could go out that night. I agreed and went back to my university dorm. Suddenly the calls from Walter started to increase again. Then more texts and voicemails, and he started messaging me again on Tinder, asking why I wasn't replying to him. I wasn't planning on replying until I got a message on Instagram that read, "Why didn't you tell me you were back in town tonight?" Receiving this message really freaked me out. I replied to him and said, "Sorry, I've been busy with my mum. How did you know I was back in town?" "Well, I checked your Tinder, of course." Tinder doesn't tell exact locations, but has a within a 1-mile message. This really freaked me out, and I messaged him back to tell him that he was being really creepy. He seriously had to have been constantly refreshing my profile to see the distance change. The messages, calls and voicemails continued. All were him now apologizing for making me feel weird about him knowing where I was. He was just worried about me. We had been texting for less than a full week. Less than a full week. I told my roommate about it, and so we decided to stay in that night. The last straw for me was getting a message saying, "Look, I'm really sorry. I'm outside your dorm with flowers and chocolates. Please forgive me." Oh, hell no. I called campus security and told them about this guy, and they never found anyone waiting outside of any doors. I'm assuming he was in his car waiting for me to reply. I blocked him on all social media, his phone number, and deleted my Tinder. I haven't been back on it since. I've seen him once out and about in town, but he didn't recognize me, thankfully. Walter, if you ever read this, I'm glad we never met. Thanks for making me second guess every single guy I find attractive. This took place about 7 years ago. I had been single for a very long time, and my kids kept telling me to get back into the swing of things, but I just kept making excuses. My nephew told me about this dating site. He said that there was no harm in talking to people, so I did it. I put everything out there so that there were no surprises when or if whoever met me. I thought that if they still contact me after reading all I had described about myself, and we matched, then maybe I would have coffee with them. Well, I matched with a few, and the conversations went well. I met with one gentleman who was way too regimental for my crazy life, and I kindly declined any more involvement with him. Another guy seemed too pushy and acted like I should be honored to be in his presence. And then came Richard. Now please keep in mind that I had a very low self-esteem at the time, so that being said, Richard seemed great. We carried conversations for hours. He lived an hour and a half away, so all we could really do was talk to each other. We talked about our kids, our dreams, our goals. My daughter even friended one of his sons on Facebook. I was a secretary for some self-help meetings in my town, and he was going to school to be a counselor. Perfect, right? We talked for at least 4 months, but after a while I noticed that he kept having small problems come up, like arguments with his mum, with whom he was living. No money for gas. His truck would break down. His oldest boy was mad at him. Just little things like that. Not anything that would set me off, but it was his poor me to heck with it attitude. I tried to let that go and really be a positive influence in his life. His mother and boys loved me and told me that they'd never seen him so happy. Time went on and we were still talking every day. I finally had an opportunity to go see him, and of course my daughter went with me so she could meet his son in person as well. I took him and his son out to eat at the only little coffee shop in that town. He knew I was on a fixed income, but I paid anyway because he was going to school and didn't have an income as of yet. We had a good time. We met at his son's house on a hilltop town. We were having such a good time that we didn't notice that the snow was coming down hard and the roads were icing up, so my daughter and I stayed the night in one of the rooms. It seemed like the closer we got to his family, the more distant they became to him. It was odd. The next day the roads were clear, so we said our goodbyes and went home, but before we left I received one extra hug from his son's mother-in-law. She whispered in my ear, "Don't fall for him." I thought that maybe there was something she didn't like about me that came out of left field. The next few days we didn't talk, which I also thought was odd. Did I do something wrong? Someone from the South Out meeting told me that there was a man looking for me. She said he looked disheveled and smelled like alcohol. This wasn't a surprise to me, because I had helped quite a few people get back on their feet, and maybe this one fell off the wagon and just needed to talk. As I was driving down my street, I saw a truck in my driveway, and at first I didn't recognize it. It was him. He'd found out where I lived and was sitting in front of my house. At first I was happy, until I looked in his truck and saw him slumped over and reeking of booze. At that point my fixed mode set in, and I asked him in for some strong coffee. He told me that he'd had a blowout with his mother, and she'd kicked him out and his boys won't talk to him. I got him some clean clothes and told him to take a shower. I figured we could sort it out the next day. In the meantime I was taking him to a meeting, so he sobered up and agreed to go. The whole time at the meeting my friends were acting like I'd lost my mind. Did they see something I was blind to? We went back to my house and he seemed okay. He was almost too okay, like nothing at all had happened. My son pulled me aside and told me he didn't like him very much, but I thought maybe he was just being overprotective. In hindsight, I should have paid attention. We went to the store because I wasn't prepared for the extra mouth to feed. I had bought 4 2-liter bottles of soda, a gallon of milk and 2 Monsters, one for him and one for my son, some chips and some stuff for dinner. After we ate, we all watched some TV and headed off to bed. I let him sleep on the spare bed in my room, but in the middle of the night he tried to get frisky. At that point I'm thinking, no. My grown kids were in the other room and something just didn't set well with me. He just didn't seem like the same man he was before. The next morning my daughter came running out of the bathroom angrily shouting that someone had pissed all over the toilet seat. He didn't say a word. Later on we were all eating breakfast, and he started to let food drop out of his mouth onto the table and floor, and was spitting food while he was talking. He took 3 2-liter bottles and drank them back to back, letting some run down his chin. What the hell? Then, yes, there's more, he took the remote and started to set recordings for his favourite shows, deleting a few of my grandchildren's recordings set for weeks in advance. Wait, what are you doing, my friend? This is not cool, I told him. But he acted like I'd said nothing. Then he went to the refrigerator and told me that I had to go to the store and buy more soda and stuff. It was all gone. All of it. He even drank my son's Monster and the whole gallon of milk. At this point my daughter was also livid, so she contacted his son and he proceeded to tell her that his mum kicked him out because he wouldn't get a job and was stealing money and eating her out of house and home. His other son won't talk to him because he keeps asking for money and won't pay it back, and he himself was mad at him for lying to me by telling me that he was going to school when he wasn't, and using me as his next big meal ticket. Well, that was it. I got all of his stuff together and took it to his truck and asked him to leave. And it doesn't end there. He had loosened some bolts on his transmission, making it impossible to move. He begged and pleaded me for him to stay, and he was at the point of snot coming out of his nose. Good God. He said that he just wanted to be close to me, and if that meant sleeping in his truck he would do that, as he couldn't live without me. Hell no. I called his oldest son and told them that if they didn't come with a tow truck and get their dad, his fate was not going to be good. They arrived 2 hours later, apologizing for their father's behavior. We found out through his son that for many years he had gone through many unhealthy relationships and taken advantage of a lot of women that had fallen for his lies. He still tries to friend me on Facebook to this day. So I'm trans and not in a safe place to transition yet. I try to dress as masculine as possible, and I have off days due to my anxiety, fear of people and depression, where I just throw on whatever and try to avoid the world. I do not do dresses or skirts, show off my body, nor do anything with my hair. I don't wear makeup or dress up to draw attention to myself. I do have a very soft face, and I'm overweight and obviously look exhausted due to lack of sleep. I'm also very short. This happened on a very off day for me, but adulting happens and I had to go to the bank. I had no one to come with me and I couldn't take my ESA to the bank because of the weather and also because they do not have the same rights as a service dog. I had taken my prescription to calm me down a little before leaving, but it had only helped so much. There was an older, bald guy at the bank. I thought nothing of him and was in my own little ball of anxiety. He looked Middle Eastern because of his features and tan, and was dressed in a nice suit. As I was waiting for the tellers to let me into the main building, he nicely pointed out the newly installed button to be let in, and I politely thanked him, thinking that was that. I went about my business, deposited my check, and was feeling all right. I didn't see anyone outside, and I stepped out into the ATM hallway for a quick withdrawal. As I turned around, the guy from earlier was right behind me, waiting by the main exit. I could have taken the side exit or gone back in, but I thought it was just silly to do so. He says to me, "Hi, my name is BG. What's your name?" "I'm A. Thanks for your help earlier." Bear in mind that this conversation was in French, and I have a stutter that grew worse and worse over the space of this conversation. I also tend to be visibly frightened when approached. "You're welcome. You are very beautiful. Can I have your number?" he responds. I laughed nervously and said, No thank you. I don't like to speak on the phone. I have anxiety." "Come on, just give me your number." "I'm sorry, I don't want to. I have an anxiety disorder." "That's okay, just give me your number," he insists. This was getting too much for me. I started to walk towards the door, and he kept pressuring me to give him my number. No matter how much I politely apologized or tried to get out of it, he kept talking to me. Eventually I gave it to him, out of pure panic to get away, but by some stroke of luck he misheard me because of my stutter. He read it back to me and asked me to repeat the number, so I just went with it. He finally bid me a good day and left, reassuring me that he'd phone me at 6. At this point I thought I was home free. I didn't live far from the bank and walked up a one-way street into an alley off of the main street to try and avoid him. There were huge planters blocking traffic going up the road, so I thought I was safe. Just as I stepped out, I heard a car rumbling through and a large white van with tinted windows sped through. On the opposite side of the alley was another one-way street leading into the opposite direction. The van nearly collided with a car going right the way up. I had been waiting for that car to pass to get into a pedestrian-only laneway across the street, so I quickly jumped back on the sidewalk. The van honked, turned around and pulled up in front of me, blocking my way. The tinted windows rolled down and, "Hi, eh? Get in the car, I'll drive you home." It had begun to drizzle, but I was 2.5 blocks from home and visibly scared of him. "No thanks, I don't have far to go." "Come on, get in." This went on and on until he seemed to grow tired of it. He left after reassuring me again that he'd called me. I was wary and took the sidewalks this time. Then out of the corner of my eye I saw a white car at the end of the block. I figured that he was just trying to get out of this little borough, and I kept walking, but it didn't make sense. I had been walking slowly, and he should have been out of the borough by now. The next block, it was the same thing. He was still there, following me along a street going the same way. My block was the last one you can drive down before having to turn onto the main road, but the street I was on went 1 block further. I ignored my turn as a gut feeling told me to keep going. I called my brother at the end of that block, mostly hidden by a big tree. I watched my street and asked him if the white van was there. As I was standing, his van slowly rolled into view at the intersection. If I had gone up my block, he would have seen me on the way back down the street. Somehow he didn't notice me, so I stood there quietly, making sure he wasn't making another round. He didn't, and I made it home safe and sound, but very shaken up. I never received a call from him. To the weird stalker dude, let's not meet, and I hope you never figure out my real number. My cousin recently reminded me of a memory I suppressed because it was one of the most terrifying moments of my childhood. I'm from Texas and we hardly ever get snow days, so when we did I always tried to take advantage. When I was in 6th grade, my school was shut down for 2 days. This never happened. It was a miracle. On one of the days my cousin came over and we decided to walk to my old elementary school to go play at the park. It was about 4 blocks away from my house. I'd lived in the neighborhood for years, so I knew someone on almost every block. This is important to note for later. I always felt safe and I knew the neighborhood well, so walking to the park with my cousin was no big deal. We got to the park and surprisingly we were the only 2 people there. We were having a blast. We moved from the playground to the field behind it. To explain the layout, we entered the playground from the back parking lot, so we could only walk through the parking lot or the field next to it to get to the playground. There was a dumpster in the parking lot that was against a brick wall, and there was a space between the wall and the dumpster that a lot of teenagers used to hang out behind. On the other side of the wall was the playground, and a few yards to the left of the dumpster was a large field. So we're enjoying our time when this truck pulled up. There were 2 men in it, and just then I got a really bad feeling. I told my cousin we should probably head home. My cousin insisted it was nothing, so I shook it off and kept playing in the snow. The men got out of the truck and went behind the dumpster. My cousin reassured me it was no big deal because, like I said, a lot of people went back there. That's when they started yelling, saying things like, "This is going to be fun." Even at the age of 11, I was paranoid. "Come on, let's go home, please," I said. "They're not even talking to us, just ignore them," she replied. She was in 7th grade, so I listened to her, until we heard them scream out. "What are you girls doing here all alone? Where are your parents? You're here all by yourself?" Chills ran down my spine and I was so scared. My cousin and I looked at each other and automatically started walking really fast through the field to head home. The men came out from behind the dumpster and started yelling. "Where are you girls going? We just want to talk to y'all." We were terrified. Our fast walk turned into a sprint. We got to the sidewalk and that's when we heard the truck door slam. My heart sank and I started crying. They peeled out of the parking lot and all I could think was we were about to be taken. The truck was making its way towards us. Knowing someone on almost every block ended up saving mine and my cousin's life. I had a friend that lived across the street from the school. All we had to do was cut across this small neighborhood intersection and we would be there. The truck caught up to us as soon as we crossed the intersection. They slowed down and the man on the passenger side rolled down his window. "Why are you girls running? We just want to have some fun with y'all." The truck came to a stop, but we had made it. We ran up to the door and started yelling for help and ringing the doorbell. The truck then sped off, and we were safe. We told my friend and her parents what had happened, and my mum came and picked us up. We were so scared we couldn't even remember any details about the truck or the men. All I knew was I would never go back to the park alone again. If I didn't think to run to my friend's house, I don't know if I would be here. If the men had caught up to us before crossing the intersection, I don't even want to imagine what would have happened. I don't know what the two men were planning on doing to us, but I know it wasn't good. So to the two men that ruined my snow day and scared me shitless, let's not meet. For context, I'm 5'3", about 105 pounds and 21 years old, and this happened to me this morning, New Year's Day, 2020. Also, just a warning that this is long, but it's really weird and unsettling, and I was hoping someone here could help me come up with a theory for the motive of this man, because I'm going insane not knowing and scaring myself even more. So my boyfriend Jack and I went out last night to a bar to celebrate New Year's Eve. I noticed he was getting possibly a little too drunk at the bar, so I suggested we go home, and he agreed. This was around 12:30 a.m. We had been drinking since 8. We got home and Jack stumbled into the mudroom and laid on the ground. I was really exhausted being drunk myself and also dealing with a drunk person, so I took this opportunity to lock the back door we came in through before I'd forgotten. After that we went upstairs and got to bed. So a little bit of background. I always lock my bedroom door, even if the front and back doors are locked, because after watching the Ted Bundy documentary of him breaking into college students' housing, it had me so freaked out. In addition, my bedroom is on the 3rd floor of the house, and just rationally, the last bedroom that you would get to if you walked into the house not knowing the layout, and entered the rooms as you encountered them. Anyway, I locked my bedroom door before bed the night before, because I had a bad feeling, but just wrote it off as my general anxiety. But Jack got up to go pee during the night and didn't relock it. At about 7:45 in the morning, I woke up to hear my bedroom door opening, and immediately thinking it should be locked. I dart my head up to see what's going on, and I see that Jack is also laying next to me, closest to the door at this point. I look up to the door just in time to see a man open my door, and my blood runs cold. He spots my boyfriend, and then slowly closes the door and walks calmly back down the stairs. He was wearing a baseball hat, with his head at a slightly downward tilt, and when coupled with the darkness of my room, it completely shrouded his face. He was possibly wearing a flannel-type shirt over a t-shirt, as it was open like a flannel. I wasn't able to see or make out any other details, other than the fact he looked on the younger and skinnier side. But he walks in, and I think he only looked at my boyfriend. I'm not even sure if he even saw me turn to look at him. At first I think my roommate's boyfriend walked into the wrong room drunkenly, and I almost dismiss it because I'm so startled by what is going on. Mind you, this whole ordeal happened within the span of a few seconds. Then my boyfriend asked me who that was, and if he should go check it out. He didn't see the man, but he was also woken by the sound of my door opening, and he also heard the footsteps go back downstairs. Me, not fully comprehending, said that there was no need to check anything out. But about 15 seconds after I'd said no, I told him that there wasn't supposed to be anyone else in the house, as all my roommates were away. We hop out of bed and throw on some sweats, and I grab a pair of scissors for defense, and leave my room to find out what the fuck is going on. We headed downstairs, and about 1 to 2 minutes after, I saw the man at my door. I'm calling the police as my boyfriend Jack grabs a knife and goes through all the rooms in the house, making sure it's clear. As we are checking, I notice the front and back door is still locked. Although the windows are unlocked, they are all still closed. At first glance, it doesn't even look like anyone had been in the house at all. Everything was just as it was. Nothing touched or ransacked. The police luckily show up at about 5 minutes after I call. It was a really quick response time, and I was so appreciative, and began to search the house. We had to file a report and fill out some statements, but all in all they weren't able to find anything but a set of possible fingerprints on the outside of one of our ground floor windows. Because there was such little evidence, I think some of the officers were doubting what I had seen. They asked me if I could have been dreaming it, since I had just woken up from a night of drinking when it happened, or if possible, a friend just decided to crash at our place without telling us. And I said, "Sir, I have never been more positive in my life that what I saw was real." I didn't perceive the threat immediately, but there is no doubt in my mind it was real, and there was not even a person who could have possibly done that, as we don't have a large friend group and rarely ever have anyone over. Then the officer and my roommates texted and asked if I could look at all the rooms and see if anything was taken. So as I mentioned, my bedroom is the last bedroom you would reach if you went through the house logically, meaning 2 of my roommates' rooms are on the 2nd floor and before mine. I checked every bedroom and all valuables were untouched. I sent pictures of my roommates' Apple laptops, watches, AirPods, etc., and they all said nothing has even slightly moved. So this man took nothing. Also, all their bedroom doors were still closed, as if no one had ever entered them. I have no proof he entered any room except mine. So this is where I get super freaked out. Before the police left, they asked me if I've had any past issues with stalkers or restraining orders, etc., and I said I hadn't. They said what was really weird about the break-in was not only because there was little to no evidence anyone broke in, but also because we had 3 cars in our driveway. One of my roommates is abroad right now, so her car is there, including mine and Jack's. So for a stranger looking in, there seemed to be at least 3 people home at that moment. I also left lights on throughout the house, so it looked like more people were home. Can you tell I'm a very paranoid person? Which is terrifying that this man felt comfortable creeping into an occupied home. Secondly, the fact that this man not only got caught breaking and entering, but the calmness of his walk back down the stairs after I'd seen him just sends chills down my spine. I have no other way to describe it other than he was acting like he had the right to be in my home, just accidentally opened the wrong door. The police also said that it's very unusual for a thief to lock up, as in close the window or door he came through after being caught. Because he took nothing, it worries me that maybe his motives were more sinister and that he could possibly come back. Why would a burglar enter a house that looks like it has at least 3 individuals in it? Why was he so calm? If he was there to rob me, why were the first 2 floors seemingly untouched? There were other weird details that I can't recall right now, because honestly I've been agonizing over this the entire day and feel very uncomfortable. If anyone has any theories as to what possibly could have been going on here, or what his motive was, it would tremendously help. I'm not looking for a benign answer, like if he was confused or drunk or something, because that is just not the case. I can't even explain the feeling of fear that ran through me when I saw this man at my door. So, the man who woke me up on New Year's Day, let's not ever meet again.